good evening again. I'm Michael Portillo, a GBNews presenter who was a Conservative Member of Parliament over a period of 20 years off and on. There was a gap of 2.5 years following my rather high-profile defeat in the 1997 general election. And that brings me to reflect on the general election campaign that we're experiencing now. For the Tories, ever since the soggy election announcement by a bedraggled Prime Minister in Downing Street, it's been an uphill battle. Given Labour's lead in the polls, perhaps it might have helped the Tories to focus on Sir Keir Starmer's party, especially what it's going to do and how it's going to pay for it. But the Conservatives seemingly can't help but make the campaign about themselves, interrupting Labour whenever it's making mistakes and blurting out policy announcements. This campaign at times has been fought as though it were a presidential election, a battle between two candidates. But the two candidates are often criticised for a conspicuous lack of charisma needed in a president. After the Boris Johnson years, some would argue that that's not a bad thing, but it certainly has paved the way for the likes of Nigel Farage. Even the Lib Dems, with Ed Davies' slapstick campaign, have taken advantage of the robotic Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer. The Labour Party thinks that if it can just simply stay out of the news and avoid a scandal, it can walk into number 10, and they may be right. Recently, the Conservatives' campaign has looked confused over whether they hope or aim to win the election, or whether their message to electors is that they should avoid giving Labour a super majority. One result of this muddle is that the Conservatives will not know where to invest their campaigning efforts. Can they be seen to abandon seats that have traditionally been regarded as marginal, but which may already be lost, to put resources into seats traditionally thought to be safe, where the Conservative candidate is in fact now in mortal danger? In 1997, as I recall, at least some opinion polls pointed to a Labour supermajority, but they tended to be discounted as too bad or too good to be true, depending on your allegiance. Well, I did believe them. A poll of opinion in my constituency, published in a newspaper on the Sunday before the election, revealed that I was just 3 points ahead of the Labour candidate. It was an invitation to the largest number of Liberal Democrat voters to switch to Labour to defeat me. Labour published the article as a leaflet, and my guess is that it was highly effective in promoting tactical voting. On the day of the election, I toured the patch in my campaign vehicle, calling in at polling stations. I was struck by how many people refused to catch my eye or even return my greeting. I abandoned the tour halfway through the day, too horrified to continue. It seems that many Conservative incumbents could suffer the same fate. They know already that over the last 5 years of Tory government, people have ceased to listen to what their party has to say. I rather assume that whilst half the party talks of winning and the other half warns of an upcoming Labour supermajority, the voters will shut their ears to both. Well, joining me now to discuss the polls is a director of JL Partners, Scarlett Maguire. Good evening. I wanted to ask you a little bit about methodology, because actually, if you ask 1,000 people how they're going to vote and 360 say Labour and 200 say Conservative, that's not the result you publish, is it?
Well, it is and it isn't. So I think normally you'd ask, we tend to use a sample of 2,000 people. That can vary, but let's say 2,000 people. You get a good idea of who they should be from census data and historic vote share. So you have an idea of what they should look like age-wise, gender-wise, region-wise, how politically interested they are. So you have those numbers in mind. You try as best you can to find those numbers anyway as part of those 2,000. You will have to do a little bit of what we call weighting at the end, though, which is to make sure that those numbers match exactly as they can the national, sort of a nationally representative sample. So that means, for example, older voters. Older voters can be harder to reach. It obviously is very important that we include them as part of the poll and include them in a representative way. So it may be that you make your older people that are in the survey slightly more important in the end results.
You used the word weighting there, W-E-I-G-H-T, exactly. which is a manipulation. You must feel a bit nervous as you're manipulating, because you're going from something which was real to something which is a bit of a confection.
I think pollsters do get very nervous about it, and we actually see, especially in the United States, there have been some quite big errors, even very recently about this. So people have, say, upweighting, so increasing ethnic minorities, for example, so that one or two people can end up representing a whole group of voters. Now, that's obviously not ideal, and that's why you try and ensure that when you first ask people, your initial survey is as representative as you can. I think there's a lot. I don't think they get that nervous about the sort of weighting that we do, and I think other pollsters in the UK do as well.
We've heard a lot in this election about MRP polls. They seem to be a bigger sample and they seem to try to fit characteristics to particular constituencies. Can I just ask you, first of all, has this actually been tested in battle? Do we know that MRP works?
So we know that MRP in principle works. It sort of slightly depends on the MRP, on the data that's going into it, and then the different versions of that model that someone might build. So it has been proved successful in the 2019 campaign here, for example, and in campaigns in Europe. Although you only have to look at the different MRPs we've got out at the moment without wanting to make any speculations. If you look at the seat projections that have come out even since the beginning of June, all using these MRP methods that you say, they can range from as low as 66 to as high as 180. So someone must be wrong. It's, and that's for the Conservative seat total. So they are only as good, as I say, as the data going in, and then some of those assumptions and those sort of very educated guesses that you're making about voters and constituencies going out of them.
Talking about being wrong, I have a feeling, my memory tells me that in 1992, when on the whole the polls were wrong, one set of pollsters said afterwards, oh yes, well actually we got it right, but we didn't like to be out on a limb, so we adjusted our results so that we wouldn't be out of kilter with the others. If that was said, I mean, that strikes me as pretty doubtful practice. Do you think that happens, that everyone, you don't mind being wrong as long as you're all wrong, but no one wants to be out there on his or her own being wrong?
There have been examples of that historically. You mentioned 92. 2017 is also a good example. There's a pollster that sat on what turned out to be a very accurate poll during the 2017 campaign just because it seemed so out of kilter with other places that were predicting quite a strong Conservative win. We obviously all know what happened with that 2017 election. I think, though, as far as most pollsters are concerned, they are confident in their methods, they're confident in their data, and if it's to be put out publicly, they put it out anyway.
I mentioned my little sob story about the poll that was taken in my constituency, which told voters effectively how to vote. It told them that they could get rid of me. What are the ethics of polls conducted in particular constituencies, do you think?
I think the ethics are completely fine. I think if there's someone that you have to, if you put something in the public domain, I think it's one of the reasons why we have a better polling industry than a lot of other countries. You have to publish all your data, all your questions anyway. So I think individual constituency polling is very good. Ours is very good. It's proven to be very accurate. I know what you mean about influencing the result, but you could say that about sort of all polling or even the whole sort of polling, media, political ecosystem. It's quite hard to distinguish between the two. And if you have no problem in principle with tactical voting or the sort of principle of casting your vote against someone rather than for someone, I don't think that individual constituency polling is problematic.
And very briefly, rather tongue-in-cheek, I think this morning, Michael Deacon in the Telegraph said, let's not have any polls at all because it would be so much more enjoyable. We wouldn't know what was going to happen at the election. He's got a point. No,
I want to keep my job, I think. But no, I don't think he has got a point, actually, because I think then what would happen is that you'd have private polls which would be spun out, which would be briefed, and I think that would be a lot more damaging to democracy than having an informed electorate.